right, so in today's episode, we are talking about German versus Italian opera in the Romantic era. And there's a big difference between German and Italian opera. And so, first, we'll start with German opera. So, for our purposes, this is represented by the works of Richard Wagner, and we'll talk about him a little bit. I will have links to explain the operas and excerpts from the operas, much better for opera cheats or something to describe the plot to you, since I don't have a whiteboard to make it much easier for you to understand the operas. So, if you like Lord of the Rings, then you'll like German opera. And I say this because Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien, pulls on the same mythology that Richard Wagner uses for his famous work, The Ring Cycle. Wagner is the epitome of German opera and a historically very important figure for good and for bad reasons, as we'll find out. So, German opera in general is slow moving, very complicated plot structure, no arias, no stoppage of music, long to develop. Okay? And so, if you are the kind of person that reads a book and the first 10 pages don't grab you, you put it down, then Wagner is not the kind of opera that you're going to easily get into. If you're okay waiting for things to slowly develop and become deep and rich, then Wagner can be very, very, very rewarding to a listener. But it is very complicated. It's dense. So German opera, in terms of Wagner, uses a couple of things that are very different than Italian opera. So one, in German opera, the orchestra is as important as the singers. The orchestra actually tells the story in Wagner. Wagner had this idea called the Gesamtkunstwerk, and I'll type that out for you, the Gesamtkunstwerk, and this is the collected work. And he wanted essentially an uber art where all of the disciplines, dance, choreography, set design, everything would merge into this thing he called a music drama. We call his works operas, but he called them music dramas. And in this uber art, he invented this concept called the leitmotif, which is this notion that the melodic line could tell a story. And so each character will have a theme, or emotions can have a theme. And for instance, you might have a man singing to a woman about being in love with her and how beautiful she is. But the melody the orchestra is playing is the theme for a different woman. And so if you're actually listening to the themes and listening to the music, the orchestra is actually telling you that the man is lying about who he's actually singing to. And in Wagner, the orchestra can tell the story. In a way, he believed this because words can lie, but the melody can't, so to speak. So German opera is slow, dense, complex, based on mythology. And again, we're only talking about Wagner. I mean, he is the guy to talk about for German opera, hands down. And he uses this concept of leitmotif. Film musicians use this all the time, right? So in Jaws, you have the bomb, 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 bomb. And then people are like, oh no, it's the shark there. Jaws is there. Well, that's essentially a leitmotif. That's Wagner's concept. Wagner was revolutionary in his ability to write for brass instruments. He has large sections of brass. His orchestrations are wonderful. He has a couple of interesting flaws, however. Being a music critic, he wrote a lot about music, and he had a lot of influence. He was an anti-Semite. He did not like the Jews. And we'll hear more about this, in a sense, when you watch the video on the Degenerate Art exhibit, of Adolf Hitler in this week's listenings. But Wagner disliked the Jews, and a lot of his characters that are doing poor things or are unintelligent or whatever actually are sort of stereotypical examples of how people viewed the Jews in a racial way, the ethnic quality of the Jew. And so a lot of his characters will have hunched backs, big eyeglasses, big noses, be very moving in the hands, very overly emotional, and be very, very preoccupied with wealth and money. Wagner was very much in the notion that the middle class was what was important, and that the people with money were the evil people, and the people with money were Jews. Now, sort of in contrast to this horrible sort of anti-Semitism in his works, he always had very, very strong female characters, playing heroes and goddesses and roles. So we have this weird duality of him hating the Jews, yet being very, very pro-woman in a lot of his opera. Very strange. In Italian opera, it's very much in the vein of Don Giovanni. Italian opera doesn't change that much. It still uses aria and recitative. The orchestra behind the music is just a background band playing chords. What's important are the singers, the high notes that they hit, the color of their voice, and their musical range. The stories surround weak women, love, tragedy, suicide, and death. So it's just a continuation, really, of the classical era of Italian opera in a lot of ways, except some of the musical qualities have changed because Romantic composers are exploring new chords and such. So the two representatives in our text are Verdi and Puccini. Now Verdi, you've heard. You've actually heard Wagner too. If you ever watched Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd goes, "I'm hunting wabbit, I'm hunting wabbit, I'm hunting wabbit." Well, that's from The Ride of the Valkyries, and you'll actually have that as an excerpt this week. Verdi, you would have undoubtedly heard, unbeknownst to you, sitting in Olive Garden. When you hear Verdi or Puccini, that's what people think about when they hear and think of opera. You would have to be kind of an opera buff or a musician to really think of opera in terms of Wagner. Almost everybody, if they were to describe opera, would end up describing something that Verdi would write, essentially, or Puccini. So as you'll see in the plots of both Rigoletto, which I don't think we'll do on this one just because of time, but Madame Butterfly by Puccini, you'll see that the plot is very, very, very similar in a lot of ways with this sort of weak woman. So we have Cho-Cho-san, this young geisha girl who falls madly in love with a U.S. naval man. He comes, he woos her, she falls madly in love with her. They have a tryst, she becomes pregnant, and he goes back off, and she spends the whole opera telling everyone in her family that he's coming back for her, and her family's like, no, you just need to get married to a nice older Japanese man who will take care of you monetarily, and you're just a young girl smitten with love. And he does come back with his American wife, and things go very, very typical for opera after that, and I'll let the opera synopsis tell you about that. So just in general, Italian opera is very, very similar to Italian opera of the classical era. It's tragic and comedic. It surrounds love. It has lots of famous love duets and love arias. It's all about the singer, not about the orchestra. Faster moving, fairly simple plots. Easier to palate to the general audience who doesn't want to invest extra time. Not to minimize it. It's very good opera stuff. German opera requires more of an investment in time, more of an investment in having a higher intellect to follow all of the plot. It's very, very complex to know who's and what and who's doing what to whom, because there's just so much going on, as you'll see again in the opera cheats. But very much explore, as you listen to the excerpt from Ride of the Valkyries, and you listen to Un bel dì by Puccini, the vast difference in the music in total, whether it's rhythm, whether it's orchestration, whether it's how fast it moves then pauses, or if it's just constantly moving. You'll notice in Wagner, nothing ever stops. It's constantly going. The orchestra's playing, the singers are singing. It's just constantly going on and on and on. So that's our quick little synopsis of German versus Italian opera. Again, in a non-coronavirus world, this would have been much, much easier to do on a board and would have taken more time and been easier to understand. But we don't live in that world, at least not for now. Again, thank you to all of you who are serving as essential workers and going out there and taking care of us. And hopefully soon I will see you on campus next semester in person and recognize you and wave, because as much as I love to hear myself talk, I don't like staring at myself on the camera too much. Not a narcissist about my looks. So. That's your joke for the week. So, same back time, same back channel, couple more videos.